Welcome to Leading Minds Revealed, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how today's top leaders harness the power of mindfulness to conquer the fast-paced, ever-changing world of business. In each episode, we sit down with C-suite executives and leaders who share their strategies for navigating rapid change with skill and clarity. Join us as we uncover the transformative mindsets that drive extraordinary leadership. These insights aren't found in business books, and they'll revolutionize the way you lead. And now, here's your host, Michael Apollo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. I'm really excited about today's episode, as our guest is somebody that I've followed for quite some time, and you may notice him from some of the videos that maybe you've seen on YouTube. And so in today's episode, we're exploring what it really takes to maintain clarity, focus, and thought leadership in a time when information is exploding, attention is fragmented, and change is constant. Together, we'll unpack how leaders cut through noise without burning out, what it means to stay credible and values-driven in fast-moving industries, how to lead teams through uncertainty while preserving trust and culture. My guest today sits right at the intersection of innovation, journalism, and leadership. He is a managing editor at CNET, one of the world's largest, or actually I should say the world's largest tech publication, where he leads a globally distributed mobile team covering phones, wearables, and emerging technologies. With a background that spans theater direction, journalism, and people leadership, he brings a rare perspective on storytelling, discernment, and leading through complexity. Please welcome Patrick Holland to the show. Patrick, welcome to Leading Minds Revealed. So great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Fantastic. Well, Patrick, I want to dive right in. You're operating in one of the most fast-paced and information-heavy environments imaginable. Before we go anywhere else, I'd love to start here. Like, what does leadership look like today when everyone is competing for attention? And how has that changed over the last decade from your experience?
Yeah, I think anyone, even if you're not in journalism or covering technology, we all know that we get so much more information so much more quickly, and there's a density of it. And that density includes things that are factual, stuff that we would label like misinformation, and sorting through all of that at any given moment can be overwhelming. What's interesting is I've been at CNET for almost 10 years now, and the little lever, the little automated machine lever has slowly increased the speed, and now stuff is coming in faster and faster. So a little bit of that is, I would say, a little bit of it is muscle memory, and how we receive that information, process it. Obviously, we're a publication that covers news, and we do thought pieces, analysis. We also do lots of reviews, and some of it's stories, some of it's videos. So at any given time, we're always asking, what are we covering and why are we covering it? And what can we add to that story? I don't know if you're familiar with what a nut graph is in journalism. Do you know what this is?
No. Please share. I would love to learn more about it.
Yeah, the term might seem a little odd. I think people might be like, what is he talking about? But the idea is, for any given story, you're reading it, or if you think of a news story, usually in the intro, like the third or fourth paragraph, we call it the nut. It gets to what the story is and why is it meaningful to the reader. And we try to do that with whatever we're talking about, whether it's a new iPhone, whether it's an FCC ruling about a company, whether it's a review that we're writing. Why is it important that you're reading this or doing that? And I think we apply that same question when we're looking at the news, when we're looking at the topics. And that's kind of like the first kind of layer that we go through before we even think, oh, we should cover this, or how we should cover this. Why is it going to be impactful to our readers? Why is it impactful to us? Why did it catch our attention? And how can we tell that story using the knowledge and wisdom that we've accumulated over our careers. My team I manage is 6 people, and I'm not just reliant on my own knowledge and wisdom to process that. We often are having, whether it's a conversation, a video conversation, or a Slack message about like, hey, what is interesting about this, or what's unique about this, or even what's new about this.
What strikes me is, like you said right now, the automation that's happening right now and the evolution in our tech platforms is enhancing the speed that information can be put out there. And in these moments, there is a lot of talk of, just get it out there and put out as much as you can. And I could see also a lot of reactivity coming from that, where it's this sort of just being driven by these just these urges to produce as much content as possible because it's possible now. And what I'm hearing though at CNET, it's a very intentional process that you're moving through, that there is some real deep consideration on the value of whatever that piece is that you're putting out there. And so, when you look at a lot of organizations right now, I think, AI is touting this potential to just produce as much content as possible. Yet, you're seeing a bit of kickback, you're seeing a bit of blowback in terms of some organizations producing content with AI, putting out there, and then just having a massive blowback from consumers. Um, what are your thoughts around this? Again, how to balance this urge to produce and in almost a reactive sense, but then almost to be driven by these real core values and core principles. Um, yeah, like it seems like there's a bit of a tension there.
Yeah, there's a tension, but I think that it's less about how we don't. I wouldn't say like our principles are ever questioned. Like, should we apply this in order just to get more stuff out? Right. I think honestly, like the size of the number of reporters and writers that we cover topics ranging from phones and laptops and things like that to things like software. We cover AI, generative AI, and then we cover things like home tech and air fryers, right? So we have people to really, the breadth of which we cover is the way we handle that. But within those different subjects, we do write a lot of mobile stories, right? We have a team of 6 of us, right? And each of us are putting out 2 or 3 stories a week, or updating ones that have new insights or a new perspective. But we look at AI in terms of like content production. I don't know. I think it's not about making more. There's like, I would call that like a McDonald's approach, like just putting out more and more like food in terms that people like it at some point, but maybe the quality of that food or the quality of those kinds of stories might not be the same that we're going for in our everyday conversations and stuff. And when it comes to AI, you're competing with AI, and at least in journalism, a lot less in terms of like the writing side of it and more in terms of like Google is still predominantly, it's the newspaper boy. Like back in the day, you'd have someone ride their bike down the street, throwing people's newspapers in the front door. And now Google is the one who really dominates that. And I'm sure your audience is familiar with SEO and being optimized. So if I'm writing a story, and even if we're promoting it on our social channels and I'm sharing it with friends, it's on the door at cnet.com. It's that algorithm that Google has, whether it might get surfaced or if it's going to be next to an article from Wired or The Verge or the Wall Street Journal, right? And now we have a thing called AI overviews, where it's taking the different bits of stories from all these competitors and giving you this answer. And sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's close to accurate, and sometimes it's a little off. And that's the first thing a lot of people see, including us. I was Googling a recipe for lentil tacos. Don't get too excited, Michael. And it's amazing the recipe that it got. It was clearly based off a YouTube video, because then on the left side, it shows you the sources for some of that. But we're competing much more with AI as journalists in that sense of the distribution of our work as much as we are in the way we create the work. Does that make sense?
What I'm hearing there is it's so important no matter I think what industry you're in, and I think what I'm trying to do is really draw some of the insights and learnings that you've had that's that from CNET's prominence in being the top tech publication out there. And some of these insights are that like it is so important to be thoughtful with what you're producing and looking at the platforms that are available to you, really thinking through the meaning, the value of this, and how this can support into SEO, this AI. I think it's is it GEO or something along those lines, where there's sort of these this ability to inform these LLM outputs so that it's choosing your information. And those principles shouldn't be disrupted now that there are these sort of platforms that can produce content, right? It's really being very calculated with how you bring all that together. I'm interested to hear, over the past 10 years, where you've been growing in your leadership role and now overseeing this team of content creators and generators and subject matter experts. Um, how has leadership changed? Do you find like in over this past 10 years, and especially now as you enter this time where it seems a little bit different? I've been hearing from more and more leaders. This is a time where, yeah, change is ubiquitous, but it seems like it's happening. The pace of it is happening faster now.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because you talked about me sitting at the intersection of like journalism and technology. And as someone who is an actual like manager and a leader, and as someone who is has an authority in terms of like certain types of content and coverage, um, I think there's a parallel there. And I think this ties a little bit back to what we were just talking about with I think back before we had like things like Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic. I know for me, a lot of people would have that one or two movie reviewers they would read. I know back in the day you would read versus a video, and you'd be like, I really like this guy from Slate, and I find that when he likes a movie, I tend to like that same movie, and when he doesn't, I don't. And so I could kind of base whether I wanted to go see a movie or not based on a few of these different writers. I feel like a little bit of that is still what AI is not good at, is that personalness, that feeling that we could talk about an iPhone and what size battery it has or how many cameras it has, but like to describe what it feels like to hold it, to use it, to have that be part of my life, the feelings I get from the photos that I'm able to take on or using features to do that, that's something AI doesn't do very well. And I think in terms of that authority and leadership, in terms of coverage, I think that's really what distinguishes us from something that you might find as a summary in AI. In terms of the actual leadership in the organization, it has changed, right? Not CNET's not immune to this. Across the world, companies are becoming more consolidated and more dense. People are becoming much more efficient in terms of their workflows and things like that. So, and the other part of it is, I think that's probably most impactful for me, is remote work. We have a great policy at our parent company, Ziff Davis, that we're allowed to work remotely, which is fantastic. And because of that, I have writers who are in Seattle and LA and New York, one in Edinburgh. And I think the challenge as a leader is being able to be present and have that empathy through a Zoom call, through a video call that I would have at the office. And this is not a critique of remote work. In fact, I think there's a lot of positives for having this be such a role, but the predominance of it, it does make me think back when I first interviewed at CNET. I had a couple in-person interviews and had some that were on Skype, and we were laughing like, who would have thought we'd have an interview on Skype? And this is like 2016. I don't know how. I'm sure you like everyone, like most people, have a lot of video calls these days. So in order to be present, to understand and listen and to form a connection with that person you're working with, to form that trust in their authority, it's a bit more of a challenge. Talk just simple things like talking over each other, having a connection. Time zones, that's a big one. I had someone working in Hong Kong, and depending on the type of year, I was either getting ready to make dinner. I'm based in California, and they're in Hong Kong, or I was just had dinner and was wrapping up, and they're starting their day. So being able to show up and be a consistent presence in their world in terms of work and assignments, asking questions. And then there's the other side of it too, where you're a manager, you're helping people get time off, you're helping people become better or grow in their roles. Development is a huge priority for me as a leader. I feel like you have to find a way to develop people, whether it's in small ways, like at one point a couple years ago, everyone on my team had exclusive, including someone who had never written an exclusive before, and being able to show them that journey and how to navigate that story. And on the flip side of that, it's also bigger things like having them grow and promote into a higher role, or grow and take on a bigger assignment, or run an event and things like that. So in terms of the way leadership has changed, it's a lot of the same stuff we still got to do. It's just doing it through a camera. It's doing it throughout the day, and finding a way to balance being present and available to someone with just the practicalities that I cannot work a 17-hour day. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah, well, you know what I find fascinating here is because, I believe CNET has been around since 1992, so about 30 years from my research. And, you know, with a tech publication that's been on the vanguard of all the evolution of technology over the past 30 years, which has been just a renaissance, it's just been an incredible explosion, a catalytic period of time for innovation. How we find ourselves at a time of massive change and tech transformation, yet this common thread of deeply humanizing our work and doubling down on the CNET side on the deep relational and human component of what you produce, the content that you release as the core value of the organization. I find that fascinating. And also when it comes to leadership and how you support your people, um, and in particular, some of the stories like what you were talking about, how important it is to value that human connection in the video conferencing. Being able to forge that connection, to be able to foster growth and support people, to be able to listen to them and to hear what their needs are, to truly hear their needs and be able to guide them along that way. You know, it, it's a really interesting thing because that's almost like what's being embodied in the content that's being provided, but also being embodied within the culture and your own leadership style. And what is the importance, like from your perspective, to really highlight that sort of deep humanity side of leadership, both from a thought leadership side and sort of a business leadership side?
I guess really, there's like a consistent thing throughout my career, both when I had jobs as like a bakery truck driver for a German bakery, or moving X-ray files as a temp. I had every kind of weirdo job you could imagine when I was starting out in theater, because hey, that doesn't pay very well, and you learn pretty quickly that sometimes the work could be rough, but if you had the right manager, the right supervisor, it definitely made it a lot more bearable. And I think about that. I think about also a lot of the environments I work with, whether it's theater, I spent a lot of time at Starbucks or Apple at their retail store. There's a sense of like of being part of a team and working together. The same applies at CNET. We're kind of smaller teams within a bigger team within a really big team. And that idea of being part of something that's bigger than you, working toward a similar goal or a similar priority, I know the term like North Star gets used quite a bit, but it is really true. Like if you have what is driving you as a leader aligned with the brand or company you're working with, it makes it much easier. But that supervisor ultimately is oftentimes can be the one that makes or breaks that experience for you. And I know a lot of people have had probably good managers and bad managers, and I would say I've definitely had my share of both, but the ones that truly resonate with me are the ones that have that human connection, that find a way in. It's not saying they need to be my friend. This is not like a Michael Scott, like, "I'm funny, like, look at me, you should be my best friend." In fact, I think that actually it could be horrible leadership, but, I think it's important to have that connection to someone because you really are able to find that motivation. And as someone who's usually in a manager role, you're more senior. There's a little bit of a role modeling going on as well, and I think all those little things add up to a better experience and stuff. Obviously, things like money, benefits, work-life balance, those things are so important, but fundamentally, again, I think a lot of people will put up with super hard work if you have a good manager and you feel connected to them and the work that you're doing, and that's not an easy task.
That's being echoes more and more and more amidst some of the top leaders that I've had a chance to connect with too. Is just especially now when there is so much change and volatility that um, the people that we work with or that's that we support as leaders, they look to us for a sense of grounded presence. They look to us to find a person that can listen and to truly hear them. And in a world where there's just so many headlines, everything is trying to pull at your attention. There's just um, one, I wasn't going to say a catastrophe, but I'd say just there's a continuous feed of really difficult events happening, nonstop, both from an external side, but then, people are internalizing that, and that stress is creating an impact. And so who do you want to have by your side when you're going through something like that? And we've brought up an AI, has come up, in our conversation here, right? And it's quite ubiquitous at this point. As I believe 1 billion people are now, close to 1 billion are using ChatGPT at the moment of this recording. But, maybe I could bring it back to that for a moment, on the topic of things changing and then juxtaposition. You're covering AI, I know it's CNET as well, and some of your team members, while simultaneously navigating its impact on journalism. I know AI is, I don't want to use the word disrupting journalism. I would say it's stirring things up in journalism. And the reason why I don't like using the disrupt anymore, because I think that's sort of a AI tech bro phrase to try to increase valuation of their companies at this point.
Yeah, you'd have to put on your quilted vest to fit in there. I don't think you're allowed to say it without one.
It's a fascinating tension, though, right? And I think a lot of organizations, a lot of people are faced with that type of challenge. I need to embrace AI, I need to understand it, yet my role or my field is being changed by it. And so, how do you personally and also organizationally hold that paradox?
Yeah, it's interesting of all people have me, and specifically CNET. I should definitely lead this conversation off by saying that our parent company, Ziff Davis, is suing ChatGPT for the way they capture data from the internet, including some of our stories and our sister site stories and things like that. So just to be very transparent to your listeners and viewers here, I think that's really important. I will say personally, I want to say this too. We talk about AI. It's as someone who does cover tech. there is all kinds of AI. There's all kinds of AI that we've used for over a decade, or if not longer. There's algorithms and machine learning, the spell correct on like your Google documents, right? Or now the grammar correct. And now we have things like it's able to even write stuff for you. The way that your phone has a super tiny, crappy little camera sensor can take these amazing images or take videos that can be used in films. It's using machine learning. It's a form of AI, but it's this new flavor of AI, that's generative AI, that's based on like these on these data models. Some of them are called like LLMs and things like that, or LAS. And what's interesting about this is it reminds me a bit of the early days of 5G, and I'm going to connect this a little bit because gets to how I'm thinking about this. Um, in terms of the technology itself, I'm kind of excited about it. I think there's a lot of potential here. I think there's lots of possibilities for some of this technology. I also think there's a lot of money for people to be making with this technology, and that could also be a criticism. In terms of like some of its potential, if you go back to when we made the transition from 4G radio and 4G LTE to 5G, there was these promises that people would be able to use a 5G connection to do remote surgeries of a wounded soldier in the battlefield, and they have some sort of device that's able to connect with someone else who is doing it remotely and fixing a problem there. Now, while that technology exists for doing a remote surgery and stuff, I also remember the early days being invited to like Warner Brothers Studios and being on like the outdoor lot of like what was like kind of known as the Back to the Future set, which ironically they're rolling off some 5G there, and they're having us use these phones to download like the second season of the series Marvelous Miss Maisel, and can you do that all in 90 seconds, all like 12 episodes or whatever it was? And I would kind of ask you to think about how you use your phone today. Is anyone downloading an entire show like that on 5G? Probably not. Are people doing remote surgeries? If they are, it's probably going through something like Wi-Fi, or in an emergency situation, if it is 5G, it's not something that's like a common occurrence. But when we think about actually what 5G is in our life right now, it's just a really fast version of 4G, and that's fine. And so there was like this hype part of that. And then there was like kind of the reality of how people would use it. Um, Going back to this new form of AI, generative AI, I feel like we're still in the hype part of it. Like, oh, it's going to do these things. It's going to be able to look at medical records and find x-rays and CAT scans and look for things like cancer and tumors. Like that would be so cool, right? It's going to become our new journalism, right? It's going to be writing and reporting all these stories for us. You won't have to have reporters and people talking to the camera. In fact, if I couldn't make it here today, Michael, you might have a generative version of Patrick Holland answering your questions based off a large language model of my writing and my YouTube videos, right? Um, those are kind of exciting things. It could also, we hear a lot of like doom and gloom about this, right? Like people relating it to a lot of movie stuff. So right now we're kind of in that hype thing, and it is a bit scary. It's a bit scary to think that someone's job might be lost or terminated because of generative AI. It's scary to think about what would that person do otherwise. And the reality is a lot of the stuff that is useful in generative AI is as a tool, as a way to sort data and go through that, organize. We use it sometimes to go through an interview transcript and search for phrases and words and stuff. We still go through it ourselves, but it's more of an assistant in that way. And so, in that sense, I'm not scared of AI. I'm kind of excited about it, but I don't think we've really gotten to where the reality will be and how it'll be used, and if it will live up to that big hype. And this is common in technology. It's not just 5G. It's phones, it's TVs. Remember 3D TVs? That was like a big thing. Who has a 3D TV now? Not a lot of people. And in terms of my own job, I do worry about it. Yeah. I hope that they don't make a generative AI language model based on managing. And I don't know if you could. I think there still has to be that human side of it. And then I can't help but think of movies like Blade Runner or things like that, where these are all these fictional things that are interacting with humans, and it's just become the norm. You hear about people using Chat GPT to instead of having a human therapist or psychologist and stuff like that. And that's the kind of stuff that, yeah, I could see that being the direction. I hope that is not it. As someone who is in an industry that's had a lot of turbulence, whether it was the dot-com boom that kind of fizzled out and lost a lot of jobs at the end of the 90s. The rise of social media was going to be the end of journalism, and now we have this rise of AI. I'm optimistic that it will survive, and I think it's a lot of the stuff that I was talking about earlier, where it's that finding that connection to my reader, to the person who's watching my YouTube video, and maybe that video nowadays is on TikTok as opposed to YouTube, right? And being able to adapt to that, I think that will withstand a lot of this new AI wave. And I do think that some of the hype will deflate. I hope it doesn't bust. I feel like a lot of people have their 401ks are kind of dependent on this, whether they've realized how big a role that Wall Street is thinking that AI will play. So it's affecting everybody, whether you want to know about it or not, or whether you want to pay attention or not. And it's not just things like AI slop or deep fakes and things like that. It truly could have an impact. I know that's like not a very black and white answer, but honestly, it's that nuance that's so important when we talk about generative AI and how it might affect us in our careers. But I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. And I hope that after we record this, there's not like a Patrick Holland lost his job to AI. I would feel pretty shitty about that. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear.
Well, I hope so. I hope not as well. But I think it's what I'm hearing as well is just maintaining a bounded optimism and cutting through a lot of bit of the noise and the hype that's out there, and to really um, explore in our own way what are these tools able to do in supporting us, and when you look at to your point, a lot of data processing right now, maybe automating some of these rote tasks, but like you said, these are more in the current rendition, AI assistants rather than a replacement of our roles.
I say, Michael, you said disrupt earlier, and I feel like if you hear the words disrupt, revolutionary, magical, like these are all like PR terms, and and something you learn pretty quickly. And we're not the only publication who cuts through that noise too. But I think what's unique when you hear those things being thrown at you, it's instant. Like it's kind of like that. Remember that game, Fruit Ninja? You're like swiping the fruit and it cuts in half. It's like you're swiping these terms away. Like, okay, it's revolutionary, magical, all that stuff. Like, but what does it do? What does it actually do? And I'm reminded of this Pete Holmes. He's a stand-up comic talking about AI. He's like, great, it could do this, but like, what about the dog poop that's on New York sidewalks? Is it going to clean that? Like, let's use it to solve like practical problems. Is it going to like fold my laundry for me? Like, that's the kind of AI I think people want, is stuff that's going to fix those like pain points. But yeah, when we talk about like even the idea of the hype, you have to cut through the hype. Otherwise, it lets people put a lot of money towards something that's not there. It lets people be scared of something that maybe they shouldn't be scared of. I'm not saying you shouldn't be skeptical of AI and that. And I do apologize for interrupting you, but I just wanted to catch that before you moved on.
Yeah, I think I totally align with that. Especially right now, a lot of leaders in a lot of organizations, perhaps like to the starting points, and what we were talking about, are getting caught up in that reactivity to take action now. And there are some case studies that are emerging of organizations who went all in, or started hedging all their bets on this AI direction, and it leading to some pretty catastrophic impact. And then to your point as well, like how do we take a very grounded, values-based, calculated approach to really understanding our direction in the similar way that CNET continues to do that in the types of incredibly valuable pieces of information that are shared, and right, and it's, I think, doubling down on what makes you unique as an organization, um, and what really is viewed as valuable from the people that you serve, right? And I think really honing in on that. And as well, another thing that I'm really taking out from our discussion is and maintaining that humanity internally within the organization. Yes, there's going to be ways to enhance your ability to um, have more effective operations and automation and all of that. But what does that human component look like? And, to your point, having just real solid leadership that embodies that and how important that is during this time when there's just, so much happening. Yeah, it's fascinating to see all of this like unfolding right now. And you know, I want to shift the scenes a little bit here and sort of shift behind the scenes a little bit. You didn't come up in a traditional journalism pipeline. You were a theater director, a playwright, even a Starbucks manager. How did those early experiences shape the way that you lead today?
Yeah, absolutely. I should say, like, in high school, I was, like, the guy who was on the school paper, but also, like, would put on the black turtleneck and do, a performance on stage, you know? I was definitely, like, a theater kid who also did journalism. I was, like, the editor-in-chief of our paper and, yeah, got, like, a scholarship for J school, and it's interesting, when I got to college, I switched to theater, which at the time was like, "Oh, wow, you're that's wild," and right after that, I all these amazing people I had started journalism school with, um, who were like maybe their own editors in chief or editor in chief of our college paper. They found themselves without jobs a couple years later because of the dot-com bust, and they became web developers and got away from that. So I think there's always been that part of journalism for me, but in terms of leadership, yeah, I definitely theater's a very kind of has a very traditional kind of leadership structure. And when I say that, I mean in terms of like you have apprenticeships or internships and journeymen, and you have terms like that. You have people who are understudies learning learning not only the role to go on, but also learning the art of how the process is to go through a rehearsal. And you're watching all this. And I went through a lot of that initially as an actor, and um, as someone who was told when they were like 22, like, you're going to be a great character actor when you're 45. And I remember saying, like, well, what am I going to do till then? And I turned into a theater director because that way I got to work on a lot of the plays that I wanted to that maybe I wouldn't be cast in. And out of that, you're watching assistant directing and things like that. And that I think is probably the base for a lot of my management style, even now to CNET. And I think of two examples. One, um, uh, there was this show in the '90s called Forever Plaid. It's these four guys doing like traditional songs. It was like a Broadway hit, and I'm working at this like summer theater as an intern in like the middle of nowhere, Virginia. And I won't say the director's name, but this person either was in the original cast on Broadway or like a second cast or touring cast, and he was the director. And I remember at that time I was the wardrobe intern, so I got really good at ironing like tuxedo shirts and using starch for the first time in my life, and which my mom was very proud of. But I remember being backstage, and it was the dress rehearsals. They have costumes on, you have the set, and you don't have audience yet. And these guys, the four guys in it, the songs were amazing. I'm not a big musical theater person, but I was kind of blown away from it. And I remember they had this dress rehearsal, and the director took his clipboard with all these handwritten notes, opened the dressing room door where the four actors were, threw the clipboard in there, and it's like, it sucked, and then slammed the door. And I was in my, it was shocking. It was disrespectful. And in one side of that spectrum of being that up and coming director, I see this, and it's so against, like, you have that voice in your head, that consciousness. You're like, I would never want to be that person. I would never want to have someone throw a clipboard at me. And so you have experiences like that that were very intense and very negative. And then on the flip side of that, I remember assistant directing for this wonderful director named J.R. Sullivan. Um, and I don't think he would describe his approach as being empathetic, but as opposed to saying, hey, Michael, I want you to go across stage here, pick this up, and I think you could say this line with a little more weight to it or a little more gravity to it. He might ask you, like, hey, why do you think your character is saying this now? And put it upon the actor to come up with the answer, or put it upon a designer in a design meeting to come up with the answer. In a way, he was guiding through the questions he was asking those he was working with. And it was not only was it much more respectful, there was no clipboards being thrown, but on the other end of it, it was also creating that connection that we were talking about earlier. And so I look at experiences like that. Also, theater's like a team environment. Again, we're all working toward the same deadline there, right? Journalism, we have many deadlines. We're all working toward that deadline. And when I was a retail manager at Starbucks, again, it's that you're a part of this bigger thing. I was there when it was a much different company. This is like 20, 25 years ago. We still had manual machines. You still had to be very good at pulling espresso. We had, I think, a couple frappuccinos, but nothing like the PSL had just come out. um, but it was still like each store was kind of, there was that teamwork, that environment. And yeah, the work was fun. It was really hard work. You're cleaning, you're pulling espresso, you're trying to keep that crowd, but you're also part of a team. And when I became a manager there, I was a manager at a store I had already worked at. There was that awkward transition, right? And having to step into a different role, and knowing that some of these people were my friends, that some of them maybe didn't think I should be in that role or not. I'm not sure, but really it became about how can I serve them? How can I serve them the most, was by keeping our focus on like doing the best job we could at that store. And so I think of like that experience, or the negative experience I would see in theater, or the beautiful experiences with like people like J.R. Sullivan. Those had a much more profound effect on who I am as a person and as a manager than the Franklin Covey course that I took at Starbucks for leadership, right? And I think today I find ways to do that. I'm not expecting that the guy who works for me in Edinburgh, that I'm going to just radically develop him into a role he's not ready for, but it's finding what motivates him, what things he wants to do in his career and his job, what skills he wants to get better at, and being able to, if not anything else, be present for that, know what those values are. So when we do have opportunities to work on that stuff or challenge, I mean, it'll serve that. But at the end of the day, he's doing a job, and it's trying to also keep him motivated and working at the high level that he already does. So it's a crazy resume in one sense, but I hope that you guys see that through line that I've seen for a while. I know a lot of recruiting managers have not seen that. And when I've applied for jobs, they're like, "You were a theater director and you did this and you drove a bakery truck. Like, what's going on? Like, who are you?" And you're like, "I don't work for the CIA, I promise."
A man of many faces, but something that's unified there is I love the storytelling, because hearing your story there, it sent me back to those moments where I've had the most, very like these peak moments with leaders that really made me feel bad, and it goes against, and I mean, it's usually because they're going through their own type of suffering, and whatever that might be, right? We don't know the full context of it, but you get a visceral sense of what resonates and what doesn't, right? And you see what sort of rubs up against your own values. And then you have those moments where you feel that sense of freedom, and that sense of openness, that sense of feeling supported, and that where you can really bring your full self forward. And I'm hearing that these are these mentorship moments where, if we think back right now, who are those individuals that you look up to most? What are the qualities that they have? What would they say to you in any given moment? This is a really great practice that was shown to me shared with me by this one teacher, Jack Cornfield, actually, who's just this amazing teacher. And that capacity is always there for us because of these experiences that we've had. We've been shown, what can feed really nourishing outcomes, and what can feed the opposite of that. So thank you for sending my mind into that. And, something that I was hearing too is that, you're dealing with a lot of, I mean, you come together as teams to deal with a lot of projects, and something that stood out for me, I don't know why, it just sparked me, is that especially in journalism right now, you're dealing with a lot of information coming your way, and everything is competing for that attention. News cycles, data, people, performance, um, from a leadership perspective. So how do you stay focused as a leader, and not just tactically, but internally? What is it that supports you? And I think in your field, it's you probably experience this a little bit more intensely than most.
It does, I will say for anyone listening who might be worried like about this guy's work, thankfully, even though there's a lot of information coming at us, it's coming at us very fast. There are times it's slow, and there are times it's quiet, and there are times you turn it off. As I've gotten older, I don't know if this is part leadership, but I think it's a little bit survival. It's having like that that time in the morning to not jump right into looking at a news feed or emails or whatever. It's taking that time for myself. It's this sounds silly. I know I worked at Starbucks, like, oh, this guy's coffee, but I got myself like a little like home espresso maker recently, and nothing fancy, but just that little time to like grind the coffee and put it in like the portafilter and tamp it just the right way, and steam the milk, and just taking that time to really be present for myself before I enter into like it's kind of like a car in a driveway, but the driveway happens to lead onto an interstate versus like a regular neighborhood street. Sometimes when I open up that Slack or email and like Apple said this, and OpenAI is doing this, and Johnny Ives is doing this, and like Meta's doing like it's like wow, how do we do that? I think part of what helps me on a daily basis is that I'm not the editor in chief. I do have someone above me, and we have a wonderful editor in chief, David Katzmeyer. That's kind of his job, is that bigger vision, taking it and kind of going through all of the news. But I'm hearing mobile news. I'm hearing AI that's also kind of mobile news, or operating systems, and I'm processing that. But also, I wake up, I got other people too. I'm not alone. So I think that's important, that we all are focused on absorbing the news, identifying stuff that's interesting or new, and doing that. And there's another side of it that we really haven't talked about, Michael, where it's like making news. Like, I'm not saying CNET is making news, but working with relationships that we have with companies to get access to something, to get an interview with someone that we might not regular, or get with what we might call an exclusive. And I think that's also really interesting, because we can look at and do a very thoughtful piece about the way broadband is still like a very weak part of our infrastructure in the United States, especially for um, people who are economically challenged, and not as sustainable in rural areas as it is in urban areas, right? We can do that coverage. We can also do stuff like I got an opportunity to go to like Apple Park, and we're looking at all these like studios they use that you could probably make a Hollywood movie or record a professional album on, and they're using that to test the microphones on an iPhone. So you get this access to um, that is kind of separate from that interstate of constant noise, constant things going on. I think the other thing too is the increase in. I think we've kind of been talking around it a bit, but the increase in the news of politics and commentary around that stuff. And I'd seen that we don't want to be taking a side on that politics or that, but we do want to talk about the impacts that has on a company or the technology or your phone or your phone bill. Last week we had Verizon had a major outage, and it affected people all over the United States. And it wasn't just an hour or so; it was went on for most of the day. Like, so you have lawmakers who are Republicans and Democrats, writing letters to the FCC that they should investigate what's going on with that. And that's the kind of stuff we would cover, right? But it's knowing that we probably aren't going to write a story about Donald Trump calling the head of Apple Tim Apple, right? While it's very amusing and very funny, it's not the kind of stuff that our readers are there for. So it is doing that. It's also there's I know people have so much. It's easy to say. Uh, it's easy to dismiss journalism when it doesn't agree with our with someone's viewpoint, and I think what we try to do is approach it as how are we helping that reader? Like, how are we helping that person navigate all of this information? And even from us, how can we make it very digestible and understandable? Like we're talking about AI earlier. There's a lot of terms that we're throwing around that people might not know what generative AI really is or what an LLM is, right? And you have to explain that and why that's important or like, oh, that's what it is. Um, I don't know how legal journalism does it. I imagine they have a harder time, but there's a lot of technical jargon to navigate as well. So um, acknowledging that there's a lot of noise out there, but our job is to kind of be like a little bit of a coffee filter and filter that noise out to really focus it in. And yeah, there are times where we don't cover something that we should, or we cover something that we thought might be of interest, and maybe it's not as of interest. And it's chasing that or having a commentary about something that someone can relate to, like something as small as I can't believe I'm telling you this, but and like the iPhone a couple years ago, they reduced the brightness that you can lower your screen at. And I'm a horrible person. I'm getting better about having a phone in bed, but like that little brightness was at like 2 nits, and it was kind of would always like be a little too bright. And the new phone had it at 1 nit, and I remember like writing a commentary about like, oh, this is so great. I can still read in bed or be on an airplane and not have it blind me. And I got so much reaction from something like that small and that personal. And so I'm constantly, even within my own life, trying to find that. All this to say, whether it's that interstate highway of noise, whether it's that access to companies, or just the personal experiences I have and the writers on my team, that's what kind of brings us together, brings us to the same table, and to decide like how we're going to serve that up to our customers, which is our readers and our viewers on YouTube and others and outlets.
If I could sort of bundle that together in a way of a framework that we can take away as leaders to support our own focus and how to stay focused amidst this just myriad of things pulling at our attention. These integrating very simple foundational practices that help ground you before and during your work, right? So ways that you can actually almost set yourself up before you enter into the stream of information that you're going to be entering into, the super highway, going this on ramp right into, a highway rather than perhaps just like a country lane. And being prepared, knowing that I think you are entering into an activity that's going to require your full attention. And that attention is going to get pulled in many, many different directions. And so when that happens, just what I'm hearing, what another thing you were sharing is that being very choiceful to cut through that to see like what is the most important piece of information here. And I think this is something that CNET has just been phenomenal at is really looking at what is the most valuable piece of information that we need to know and having some real core values and principles to discern, right? Like what's sort of in scope and what's out of scope, because that helps you to focus on what matters most as well. And I think something else that you shared that I think is really important is this seeking out those meaningful moments and those meaningful experiences that you can really anchor your attention on, and it usually falls into this, like being in service of others, finding the experiences that give you a bit more of a greater sense of connection to purpose. And I've been hearing that more and more, lately, that one way to balance, this business life that's our reality is to find those moments where we can gain nourishment and happiness from other purpose driven activities. And those would be connected to work or completely separate. But whatever it is, just to make sure to find that. So thank you so much for sharing that. I wonder, was there something else coming up there for you?
I'd say we keep on calling it like that noise, right? And I think if you think about if just something as simple as like the TV's too loud, what would you do? You turn the volume down, right? You do that, but there's one thing to say that about an analogy about a TV or the noise of that TV, but it's another thing when you really can't turn that noise down, or that noise is a part of your job. Like, I'll say this: like I used to, like everybody, I had social media accounts, right? And when I started at CNET, those were primarily like friends of mine. They were a little more personal, and maybe I shared a little more of my personal life. And now they're much more about the stuff I do at CNET, and the followers are much more based on that. And I feel like just as my work has kind of fed into social media, it's easy for that work to separate that work even when I get home. Like I use technology in my everyday life. Just I have like a Breville little oven, right? And if that's not working right, it's frustrating. And I don't have to be a smart oven reviewer to know like, oh, this doesn't work well. By the way, it works great. I love it, Breville. If you're listening, very good job. But I do think it's some of those things. It's hard. It can be hard to turn off. So finding that for yourself. And then the other thing, going back to uh, how that noise, how we choose what we focus on, it's also the other part of it, like making sure people are taking time off, right? I know a lot of companies have like unlimited PTO, but make sure people are actually taking the time off they need and to recharge, to not get burnt out. Going back to one of the times I was at Starbucks, I remember there'd be people who would just not take time off, and then like you could tell they were getting a little burnt out, and I just like, hey, just take a week off, and if you still feel burnt out about the job, then we could talk about something else. And they'd always come back refreshed and, no, I'm good to see a timer off. Like I think it's really important to be able to unplug from work and take true time off. Not I don't have my work email or my Slack messages on my personal phone unless I'm at an event, and it's gonna be fine. The world will continue revolving if I don't respond to that email, and if it's of utmost importance, get this, my work has my phone number. They could always call me, but they don't. So, I think it's so important to have that balance, and it's funny, it all does blend together a bit, and, the other part I wanted to follow up with is, like, the idea of, like, journalism, and, we hear the term fake news, and I don't want to get into necessarily the politics of that, but I'll say like in journalism, we want to make sure that we're surfacing the facts as best we can, and that's usually there's a it's always been around, but the idea of going to the first source of it, right? If you're writing a story about Apple or iPhone, I want to talk to Apple about it. I want to talk to the company that if we're talking about ChatGPT, we're going to want to talk to Sam Altman or whoever that is, right? And I think that's the other thing that we're able to do is have those conversations, those questions, those interviews, or ask their representatives those questions. And you don't always hear back, but when you do, you're able to share that as well. And I think that's something that separates us from when we talk about AI and stuff. I don't see them doing that. Maybe yeah, technically they could send an email, but are they really smart enough to know like, oh, I should ask this, or I should build that relationship with their PR so I can have those conversations, or when they're difficult and we don't agree on something, we're still able to have that working relationship and get things done. So there's also that kind of noise. I realize I'm adding more noise to a very focused summary that you just gave, but I did want to highlight that stuff because I felt it was important.
Yeah, I think and then the last piece in particular, it's really thinking about what is that information that you want to actually start consuming and being a part of, and asking yourself, is it true as well? I think being really choiceful about that. I think being very choiceful, that's sort of the core thing that comes up for me. So I'd like to just sort of like just synthesize it here. If leaders listening today and they wanted to maintain clarity and credibility in this type of noisy world, what would be sort of the advice that you would provide them, just in a nutshell, and how they could start?
Know what your values are and know how to maintain your values, whether you're in a quiet room or in the middle of a hurricane, right? And The fact that there's a lot of things going on in the world doesn't necessarily mean that it's a constant, but to there's something you learn in theater real quick. If an actor is listening to another actor, you could tell because the volume of their voice kind of matches it, right? And if someone's really quiet and talking like this, and someone's very loud and talking like this, there's a disconnect going on there. And as a director, you try to meld that. And I think it's easy when we have all that noise, or we keep on talking about this like analogy of an interstate highway, just this constant flow of stuff, to get caught up in the energy of that, to get caught up in the noise of that. And I think as a leader, and we're human beings, it's not I'm not perfect. I get caught up in that stuff sometimes too, but it's always going back to those values that helps center. I think that'll help center you. I know it does for myself. And the other part is, if the people that you work for and the people that work under you, is how do you serve them with those values? And if I'm ever misguided or overwhelmed beyond taking like that breath for myself, those are questions that I use to find my center again and find my purpose, or remind myself why I'm doing this. And I think that's very important to do, no matter if you're coming from the 90s or you're now, or in our AI generative future when we're all working for open AI.
I definitely resonate with that. I do feel that's definitely timeless and very valuable insight there. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Patrick. And, if anybody wanted to follow your journey, or to learn more about some of the work you do, what would be the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Trick Holland. You can find me on platforms, either Trick Holland without the first two letters, or you might find Directed by Patrick, was a theater director. Also, there's a small site called cnet.com. You'll find my writing there, my bio page there. And obviously we have presence on like things like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. And I'm sure you can find CNET there as well. And I might pop up and try to tell you not to get a phone, or that you should get a phone that you never thought about getting.
Fantastic. We'll definitely add those links into the description of the episode. So please, if you're listening in, check that out. Patrick, it's just been a very thoughtful, and I think we've covered such a gamut here. And in particular, I think just around the sheer, just the amount of noise and so much that's pulling at our attention, and how to make sense of that, right? And how to make sense of that. And I think this is something that I'm going to take away too, and how to stay grounded, how to stay really choiceful and connected to those enduring values that can really help keep us grounded when everything around us is changing, and to really just simplify and to check in, like, is this true? And what is the right way through this? And I think it's a very thoughtful and intentional way forward that really makes sense. And I think that's what we've heard here. So thank you so much for bringing this forward to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining in to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. I look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Leading Minds Revealed podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights, join the conversation, and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.